starting from scratch. And you don't need to have any experience at all whatsoever with CSS to follow along. Alright, so a few things before we get started. I want to stress that this guide is for beginners and people that don't really know anything about CSS. It's a continuation of my HTML crash course on YouTube, so unless you know HTML pretty well, I would suggest going back and watching that video first, and the link is in the description. Alright, now it's important to know that when it comes to CSS, it's much more free than HTML, meaning that there's many ways to do the same thing. In HTML you have specific tags that you use to create a document, while CSS is used for design and layout, so it's much more artistic. Many advanced web developers still struggle with CSS because it's much more right brain. However, when you're following along with this guide, you'll notice that we're going to be looking at the CSS syntax, not so much creative and artistic abilities or styling trends and stuff like that. Alright, so hopefully that makes sense. Also, we're not going to be covering more advanced topics like Flexbox and animation. Flexbox is a CSS3 layout mode, and it does things like align elements very easily, but I think it's too advanced for this video. Plus I do have a video called Flexbox in 20 minutes that teaches you all about it, so if you want to learn more about Flex, I'd suggest watching that after this. Alright, and I will be doing an advanced CSS3 video very soon, and that'll include things like animations and transitions, all the pseudo elements, things like that. Alright, so we can't cover everything in this guide. This is a crash course, but I will be covering the most essential and useful parts of CSS. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about what CSS actually is. It stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And like HTML, it's not a programming language. It's actually a style sheet or a styling language. It's used for website layout and design, and it's used alongside of HTML. Now, it can also be used with other markups like XHTML, XML, SVG, but it's most commonly used with HTML. Now, by default, CSS doesn't have any logic like a programming language does. It's strictly presentational. However, there are technologies such as Sass and Less that do allow you to extend the functionality of CSS and allows you to use things like variables and conditionals. But that's way beyond this course. I did want to let you know that is an actual thing. Alright, and I do have videos on Sass and Less on my channel if you're interested. So all you need to get started, just like when in the HTML crash course, we just need a text editor and a browser. We'll be using Google Chrome as our browser and Sublime Text as the editor. I went through the installation of Sublime Text back in the HTML crash course, so I'm not going to do that again. You can use Sublime or you can use something else. Atom and Visual Studio Code are fantastic editors, but I do think they're overkill for this particular video. Alright, Notepad++ and TextMate are also some very simple and very light solutions. Alright guys, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Let's create a new folder. I'm going to put it on my desktop, and I'm just going to call this CSS Crash Course. Alright, now there's going to be two things that we're going to do. First, we're going to build like a cheat sheet like we did with the HTML crash course, where it's not really a put together site or anything like that. It's just a way for us to learn. It's a way for us to add classes and IDs and then go through all the specific styling rules and stuff of CSS. And then after that, we're going to actually lay out an actual, I wouldn't really call it a website, but I guess a website homepage where we use HTML5 semantic tags, and I show you how to float things and just create a basic web page. Alright, so let's go ahead and create a new folder in here, and I'm going to call this CSS Cheat Sheet. Alright, and that's what we're going to be working with first, but then I'm also going to create a folder called My Website, and that's what we'll be working with after. So for now, we're going to work in the cheat sheet. So let's go in there. Let's create our index.html file. Alright, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up in Sublime Text. I'm actually going to open up Sublime, and then I'm going to go to File, Open Folder, and we're going to go to, where is it, the desktop, CSS Crash Course, and I'm going to open that up, and then you can see I have both folders over here. Okay, so we're kind of treating these both as different projects. So we're starting in the CSS cheat sheet. So let's open up the index.html, and with Sublime we can say HTML tab, and that's going to give us a basic structure. And I went over all of this in the HTML crash course, so if you don't understand what this is, please go back and watch that video. So for the title, let's just say CSS cheat sheet. Alright, and before we write anything, I just want to go over the different types or the different methods of using CSS. So there's three main ways of adding CSS to an HTML file. There's inline, internal, and external. I'm going to show you an example of all three, but let's talk about the difference first. So inline CSS means that you're adding a style attribute to the actual HTML tag, just like you would any other attribute like title or href. This is not what you want to do. It's horrible practice, and you'll never see a professional web developer do this. One of the key rules to follow as a developer or a programmer with any language is to keep the presentation, the functionality, and the styling completely separate, or as much as possible. Using inline CSS is mixing that presentation with styling, and it's not efficient, it's not scalable, and it's just not practical. Inline CSS refers to using style tags within the head of your HTML page. We did do a little bit of this in the HTML crash course at the end. And this is a hell of a lot better than using inline CSS because it does separate the style from presentation, but it's still not the suggested method. This makes it so that the CSS that you're writing can only be used in that particular HTML file. Alright, it also fattens up the HTML file, and you want to keep it as slim as possible with just HTML. The third option is the best and the most used, and that's to use an external CSS style sheet. You can create a separate file with a .css extension, and then you can simply link that file to whatever HTML file you want, whatever you want to use that CSS with. Alright, so we're going to be using the external method, and that is, for the most part, suggested all the time. Alright guys, so let's go ahead and open up our index file in our browser. Alright, so we have our CSS cheat sheet. I'm just going to open index.html, which is going to be completely blank. Actually, the title, did I not save this? No, I didn't save that. So if I reload, now you'll see we have CSS cheat sheet in the title. If I do a Control U, you'll see the source code, which just matches what we have over here. Alright, so let's go ahead and look at the different ways to implement CSS. So I'm going to put an H1 in here, and I'm just going to say hello world. Alright, so we have a simple H1. If I save it and reload, it's going to show up on the screen. Now, let's say I want to just change the color of this. Okay, now the first way that I'm going to demonstrate is inline CSS. So that is by using a style attribute and then doing the actual CSS, which will say color red, and save. Okay, now that does work, but this is a horrible, horrible way of implementing this. Okay, because we're mixing the presentation, which is just the H1 and the text, with the styling, or with the CSS, which is this color red, and we don't want that. We want to keep these separate. Alright, so that's the first way, and we don't want to use that way. Now, to not use inline styling, we need a way to grab onto this, and we can actually use the element itself. A lot of times we'll be using IDs and classes to grab onto an element, but you can just use the actual HTML tag. So let's take a look at the second way, which is internal. So for that, we would put style tags up in the head area. Okay, you want to put these in the head, and then inside there we can put our CSS. So for instance, we want to grab the H1, we can use that as the selector, and then some curly braces, and then we can say color red. Okay, if I say, actually let's make it blue just so you can see that it definitely is coming from here. So if I reload, now we get blue. Alright. And like I said, this does separate presentation from style, but you can only use these styles within this file. Okay, you may want to use these in other HTML files as well. So that brings us to the third method, which is external. So what I'm going to do is go into our CSS cheat sheet folder and create a new folder called CSS, and then this is where we would put our style sheets. Okay, so let's create a new file, and we'll call this style.css. We gotta save it, Control S, style.css. Okay, now you don't have to call it style, you can call it whatever you want, just make sure it has a .css extension. Alright, and then what we'll do is we'll say H1, just like we did in the style tags in the HTML, and we'll say color green. All right, and then we'll save that. Now, obviously, that's not going to work right now because it doesn't know to even look at this style sheet. So what we're going to do is get rid of the style tags here, and we're going to use an HTML tag called link. Okay, so we're going to say link. In Sublime Text, we can just type the word link and hit tab, and that's going to give us the tag along with some attributes. So it has this rel attribute, which is telling it that this is a style sheet. We also have a type, which is saying that this is going to be CSS. And then the href is going to link to the CSS file. So in here, we want to say css/style.css. And the reason I put this CSS slash is because it's located in the CSS folder right here. So you have to specify the entire location. Alright, so let's save that and reload, and now you'll see that it's green. It's actually looking at this style.css file. Alright, so that's the recommended way to do it. And if we wanted to use these styles in another HTML file, all we have to do is put this in there. So let's look at a quick diagram of a CSS selector and a declaration. So this is the basic format. So we have the selector here. In this case, we're saying A. So an A tag is a link. Okay, we learned that in the HTML crash course. Now you can use the actual element like this, but what this is going to do is it's going to apply this style to all links everywhere. If you wanted to target a certain link, you could use a class or an ID. Okay, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And then to start the declaration, we have an opening curly brace. To end it, we have a closing curly brace. And then inside there, we have a property and a value. Okay, so like a key value pair. The property is going to be, in this case, background color. And we're going to go over a ton of different properties that are available in CSS. Now to separate these, we have our colon here, and then we have the value. In this case, we're saying the background color should be yellow. And then you always want to end these with a semicolon. Alright, so we're going to jump in and start to create some styles here. Now I'm going to go to the CSS file and get rid of the H1 styling here. Okay, and then I'm just going to say body and then open up some curly braces. Alright, so we have our selector here, which is body. This is going to pertain to the body tag and everything in it. Okay, well, I shouldn't say everything in it. It's not going to actually change like the background color of every element, but the body itself, which wraps around everything. So let's add a background color, and I'm going to change this to a value which is going to be a hexadecimal color, and I'm going to go over this in a second, but it's going to be $ F4 3 times. So if we save this and we reload, notice that the background, first of all, the green text went away because we got rid of that style, but the background of the body is now light gray. Okay, this is a hexadecimal value for light gray. Now if we want to change the color of the text, we can use the color. Okay, so let's say we want color to be the hexadecimal value of 6 5s, and that's going to be a dark gray. Now if I reload, notice that the H1 actually changed to a lighter gray. So any text we put in by default is now going to be this color. So just a little bit about colors in CSS. Now we can use different values here. So we can use color names, we can use HTML5 color names, hexadecimal values, and our RGB or red, green, blue values. So with this example here, we're using color names. So color red, we can use blue, yellow, very common colors. And then HTML5 added some extra colors here. Okay, so for instance, coral, which is like a light orange, and there's a lot of them. There's misty rose. There's all types of weird colors that you can look up. Alright, now hexadecimal values look like this. We have the number sign, and then you have a code which pertains to that specific color. Okay, 6 zeros is going to be black, and 6 F's is going to be white. You can also use shortcuts and use three characters as well for some of these, and I'll show you that in a little bit. And then we can also use RGB values, so we use RGB and then some parentheses and then the value of red, green, and blue. Okay, so here we have blue at 255, which is going to make this color a certain shade of blue. Alright, so back to our HTML and CSS. Now what I'm going to do is under the H1, I just want to put in a paragraph. And in Sublime we can type in the word lorem and tab and it'll give us a bunch of sample text. Alright, we'll reload that just so we have something else to look at. So for the body, I'm also going to add, I'm going to change the font. So let's say font family, and I'm going to say Arial, And then if for some reason Arial can't load, it's going to load what we put here. Let's say Helvetica. And then we're going to do sans serif. Alright, so let's save that and reload, and notice that the font has now changed. Now, in CSS you have web-safe fonts, and then you have other fonts which you can use. Now, web-safe fonts means that you don't need to import any kind of special font. You can just use it, just like we did here. Alright, if you want to use some kind of specialty font from, let's say, Google Fonts, you'd have to bring that in like you would a style sheet and then apply it. Alright, so let's take a look at some of the web-safe fonts. So here's an example of the different font families that we can use, and we don't have to import any kind of special font files or anything. So this is what we use, the Arial Helvetica Sans Serif. We also have Arial Black, Bookman Old Style, Comic Sans, Courier, which is kind of like a Microsoft Word type font. Let's see what else. Georgia, Verdana is pretty nice. I like Verdana. I like Tahoma. Times New Roman, which is the default. If you don't apply a font, that's what the default will be in most browsers. And that's pretty much it. So these are the web-safe fonts. And when we talk about serif fonts, you can see that the serif fonts have the little hooks on the end here of the letters, and then sans serif is kind of a flat look. Alright, so that's the basic difference between those. I'm not an expert on fonts or anything like that, but I just wanted to give you guys an idea of what's considered a web-safe font. Alright, so let's get back to our CSS. I'm just going to make this wrap so that you guys can see everything. We'll just do word wrap. And let's go ahead and add, let's change the size of the font. So for that, we can simply just say font size, and we'll set that to 16 pixels. And if we save and reload, it's going to look the same because that was actually the default. But if I wanted to change this to, let's say, 12 pixels, reload, you'll see it gets much smaller. Alright, now we can also change the font weight from here. So if we say font weight, we can set that to bold and reload, and it'll make everything bold. You can also use numbers like 400. You can change the boldness with the number as well. But we're gonna keep this at normal, okay, by default. Now, there's actually a shorter way to do this when you're dealing with these font dash styles here. We can actually just use font, and then we could say normal for the font weight, and then we could do the font family, which would be Arial, Helvetica, sans serif, and then we can just put the font, actually let's put the size here, so 16 pixels. Alright, and then if I get rid of these three and reload, we get the same thing. Okay, so it's just a shorter way of doing it. And let me just put a little comment here, and I'm just going to say same as above. Alright, and you know, I'm leaving all this stuff here so you guys have this as a reference. Normally you wouldn't have both of these, but I want you guys to have this if you need it later on. Okay, another common style you'll see within the body is the line height. Okay, now notice that to me, these lines look pretty close together, so I'd want to kind of separate them just a little bit. So what I'm going to do here is say 1.6 em or em, and let's save that and reload. And now notice that there's more space in between the lines. All right, that's what line height does. Now em or m is just a unit to use in CSS. It's usually used for more responsive type websites. You could just make this pixels as well. So if we wanted to say 3 pixels for the line height, you'll see that there's only 3 pixels in between, which makes it unreadable. But you can do that. But we're going to stick to em. Usually you'll see m for line heights. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is just add a little bit of HTML over here, some more HTML. So let's go, actually, you know what we'll do is we'll wrap the H1 and the paragraph in a div, and let's give that a class. We'll give that a class of, let's say, box-1. Okay, so wrap the paragraph and the heading. Okay, we'll push that over a little bit. I don't like how, yeah, I'm just going to make this a little bigger. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between class and ID. Now, as far as the browser goes and enforcing rules, ID and class, really, there's no difference when it comes to HTML and CSS. But what you want to do is you want to think of IDs as elements that are IDs that aren't going to be put anywhere else. They're going to be unique. So, for instance, if you have a main nav bar, you might give that an ID of main nav bar because you're not going to be using that main nav bar ID on any other element. But if you're using something like, let's say, class box 1, where we're going to give this a background color and a border and stuff, you may use this box 1 somewhere else because you may want to apply that style. So it's not unique. So you would use a class. If you had a class that made text red or something like that, you would want to use a class because you may use that somewhere else. So just remember that IDs should always be unique. Classes, you can reuse classes. All right, and if you don't want to follow that standard, I would suggest just always using classes. You'll notice that with frameworks like Bootstrap, they don't use IDs for anything. It's all classes. You just don't want to repeat IDs. That's the bottom line. Alright, so we have this div with the class of box1. So let's go ahead and save this, and then we'll go into our styling. And let's see, I'll just make this smaller. So to target a class, we use a dot. So remember, we called it box1, so we're going to say dot box1. Alright. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to add a background color first of all. So let's say background dash color, and let's set it to like almost black, a dark gray, which is going to be 6 times. Now this is one of those colors where we can use a shortcut. Okay, we can actually use just 3 threes and it'll give us the same color. Alright, so let's save that and reload, and notice that the background is now a dark gray. Oh, one thing I also wanted to do was on the body, I want to zero out the margin, and I'm going to go over margin later on, so don't worry about that, but I'm just going to set margin to 0, and that'll get rid of these spaces around it, okay, except for the top, because headings actually have margin by default. Alright, so we have this box 1 with a background color of dark gray, almost black. So we want to change the text color because it's almost unreadable. So we're going to say color, and let's set that to white. Now we could do the text white, but I prefer to use hexadecimal, so I'm going to say number sign and then 3 Fs, okay, or 6 Fs, whatever you want. Reload, and now the text is white. Now I would like to push everything in from the edges, and you'll see this a lot. Usually with websites, the content will be pushed in. It's not going to go all the way up to the edge. So what we can do is create a class. I'm just going to put it right here, and let's call it container. If you've ever used Bootstrap or other frameworks, you've probably seen this quite a bit. And we can set this to a width. Okay, so for right now, I'm just going to say 500 pixels. All right, and then let's go ahead and save that, and then let's apply that container. So let's wrap it around the box. Actually, I'm going to have this wrapped around everything. Okay, so we'll go down here and put the ending div tag. Let's tab it over. Alright, so if we save that and reload, you'll see that it's now 500 pixels wide. Now with containers, like I said, you usually want to push it to the middle. So to do that, we're going to just say margin, and we're going to set it to auto. And what this does is it sets margin, it sets an auto margin on all sides. Okay, it's going to set it to the same on all sides. So let's save that and reload, and it gets pushed over. It puts an even amount of margin on this side and this side, and margin is basically spacing around an element. Now setting it to 500 pixels, actually you probably wouldn't see 500, you might see like 960 is a popular width for a website, okay, something like that. But this makes it so it's not responsive. If I make it smaller, you can see that it's not responsive, it's not adapting correctly. So what we would do is set it to a percentage instead of pixels. So I'm going to set it to 80%. Okay, and then reload, and then as I make it smaller, you'll see that it actually responds correctly to the size. So you for the most part, you want to use percents when you're dealing with containers or something like that. All right, so now let's talk about margin and padding. So a lot of people get confused at first with margin and padding because both of them pertain to space around an element. So I'm going to try to explain that the best I can. So there's something called the box model in CSS, and think of this content block as whatever your element is, whether it's a div or an A tag link or a paragraph, a heading, anything at all. And padding is going to be the space in between that element and its border, okay, its edge. So that padding, you can set the top, the right, the bottom, or the left padding to whatever you want, okay, and it'll add that space. Now the border has to do with the border property, and you're not always going to be using this, but you can set the border width, you can set that to the width, and you can do top right, bottom left, and then margin is going to be the spacing outside of that border. Okay, so just remember, padding is the space inside, margin is the space outside. Now when we're applying styles to, or when we're applying padding and margin, there's different ways to do it, okay? There's the long way and there's the short way. Now in this example we're using margin for this paragraph. So we're saying we want the margin top to be 5 pixels, the margin bottom 5, the margin right to be 10, and the margin left to be 10. So if we look at our box model here, it is the top and bottom margin that we want to be 5. So it would be this, and then the left and right would be 10. Okay. Now over here we have this same thing in a shorter syntax. So instead of doing margin top, margin bottom, and so on, we can just say margin, and then we can do top, right, bottom, left. Okay, that's what you need to remember: top, right, bottom, left. And you'll see top 5, top 5, right 10, bottom 5, left 10. All right. Now to take it a step even into, to make it even shorter, if the top and bottom are the same and the right and left are the same, okay, such as in this case top and bottom are 5, left and right are 10, we can do this, and we can say 5 for the top and bottom, 10 for the left and right. Okay, so that's a shorter syntax. And then of course if they're all equal, you can just do margin 5 pixels, and that'll add 5 pixels around the entire thing. And you can use this same format with padding. You can do padding top, padding bottom, and then same thing over here, you can just use padding. Alright. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a border to this just so we can see the difference between padding and margin more clearly. So for box 1 here, let's go ahead and let's say border right. Okay, and we're going to set that to 5 pixels, red. Okay, so it's size, color, and then type or style, which I'll say solid. So let's go ahead and save that and reload, and you'll see that on the right we have a 5 pixel red solid border. Alright, now if we wanted to add borders on other sides, let's say we wanted to do left. Okay, so if I save that, it's going to add it on the right and left, and of course we could do top and bottom. Alright, and that's just going to give it a 5 pixel border around the whole entire thing. Now, just like with margin and padding, there's shorthands. You don't have to do all of this if you want them all to be the same. Okay, so what we could do is we could just say border, and then we could say 5 pixels, red, solid. Okay, and then if we got rid of all of this and saved it, reload, we get the same thing. So this is what you would want to do instead of this. But I'm going to keep it there, again, just so you guys have it. Let's say same as above. Alright, now you can also target specific border properties like the size, the color, and the style. So let's say, for instance, we wanted to change the width. We could say border dash width and set it to 3 pixels. And if we reload, that's going to set all sides to 3 pixels. If we wanted to, let's say, just target the width of the border bottom, we could say border bottom width, and let's just set that to 10 pixels. Okay, so we can target it like that. We can also do styles. So if we wanted to say like border, let's do border top style, and we'll set that to dotted. So if I reload, now you'll see the top border is dotted. And I believe there's solid, dotted, dashed, double. I think there may be a couple others, so if you want to look that up, you can. But for the most part, at least for me, I usually use solid. All right, now I want to keep this very simple, and I just want to have this. So I'm going to put that right there, and that should overwrite everything. Okay, but again, I am going to leave all this just so you guys have it. So now let's look at padding. Okay, so in here, let's say padding. We'll say padding top, and we'll set that to 20 pixels. Reload, and you'll see that it adds it to the top. Now, there was initially some padding here because an H1 by default has padding. Now, if you wanted to, you could zero out the margin and padding for everything on the page. And let me show you how to do that. So if we go up to the very top here and we put an asterisk, this is basically saying everything. So every element, every style, and we'll set this to margin 0, padding 0, and that'll zero everything out. That's called a reset. Okay, so if we reload now, the H1 and the paragraph, you'll see they don't have any margin or padding by default. So you may want to add a reset if you want to just zero everything out and go from there without any confusion of having, initial padding and margin on certain elements. So it's completely up to you if you want to do that. But I'm actually just going to comment this out so it doesn't take effect. Alright, so we have some padding on the top, but what I want to do is add padding all around. So what I could do is we could do it the long way. So we could say bottom, right, left. Okay, we could do that. But you don't want to do that, especially if it's going to be 20 pixels or no matter what size on any side, you just want to use padding. Okay, so we'll say padding 20 pixels. And let me just put a comment here, and I'm just going to say same as above. Alright. Now, margin, on the other hand, is going to be the space outside of the border. Alright, so let's say we want to add margin top, and we'll say 20 pixels. What that should do is move the entire thing down because it's going to add space above it. Okay, and again, we can do this with margin, or we could just say margin 20 pixels, and that's going to put it all the way around. Okay, you'll see that it actually got skinnier because it added 20 pixels here. But let's say we just wanted the margin on the top and bottom. We could do 20 pixels and then 0 for the right and left. Alright, reload, and there we go. Alright, so now I want to move on to some text formatting styles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to target the box 1 H1. Okay, so this is saying that I want to style any H1 that is within this class. Okay, it's not going to style any H1 that's not in this class. So let's start with, let's just change the font family. Okay, so we don't have to have one font family for the whole site. Let's say we want to use Tahoma. Reload, and now you see that this is now a Tahoma font. Let's say we want to change the font weight to 800. And let's say we want it to be italic. We could say font style, set that to italic. And if we reload, there we go. So we have font weight, font style, we have text decoration, which we could do a underline if we wanted to. Okay, that gives it an underline. If we wanted to change it to all uppercase, we could use the text transform and say uppercase. Okay, reload. Now it's all uppercase. Let's see what else. Letter spacing. So if we want to put space between the letter, this would usually be with the M unit. So let's say 0.2 M. And now reload, and now you see there's space between each letter. And then we also have word spacing. Say word spacing, and we'll say 1 M. Reload, and you'll see that now there's more space between each word. So these are just some text formatting styles. Alright, let's go ahead and put another box on the page just to add some more HTML. So I'm going to copy box 1, and we'll change this to box 2, and that's fine. We'll leave the same text, I guess. Reload. Actually, we'll change the heading. We'll say goodbye world. Alright. Now notice that we don't have any styling because we're now using a box 2 class, not box 1. If we change this to box 1, of course it's going to apply those styles. But let's change it to box 2, and then in the CSS we'll just say box 2, and let's see, I don't want to add a bunch of crazy styles. Let's just give it a border, and let's say we want it to be 3 pixels, and we'll do dotted, and let's do like a light gray. Reload. Okay, so now we have a border. Let's add padding, 20 pixels, and let's say margin. Let's do 20 pixels top and bottom, 0 left and right. Okay, so it adds some padding and also added margin on the top and bottom. So next thing I'm going to do is let's add a list item, unordered list. All right, so let's go back to our HTML. We'll go under box 2, and let's put a div. We'll give it a class of, let's say, categories, and let's put an H2. We'll say categories, and let's put a UL with some LIs. Okay, each LI will have an A tag, which will just go nowhere. We'll say category 1. I'm just going to go like that. We'll say category 1, 2, 3, and 4. Alright, so now we have a simple list. This is what it will look like by default with no CSS. So now let's go over to our style.css file, and let's apply some styles to categories. Remember, categories is actually the div that surrounds this. It's not the actual list itself. Okay, and that's what I mean with CSS. You can do the same thing a million different ways. We could have put the class on the actual UL, but you know, you'll find your way of doing things. So let's just give it a border of 1 pixel, 1 pixel, light gray, solid, and then we'll just give it some padding of 10 pixels all the way around. Okay, and it's going to just go around the whole thing. There's also a border radius property that we could use, and that can give it rounded corners. So let's say 15 pixels, and reload, and now notice that this box has curved edges. Alright, let's see what else. Text align, so that's something you might use a lot. So let's say categories, and I think it was it an H1 we gave it? An H2. So let's say we want the H2 to be aligned to the center. So we'll say text align center. Reload, and now you'll see it's in the middle. Alright, let's apply some styles to the UL and the LI tags. So we'll say categories UL. Now ULs by default have some padding. You'll see they're pushed over. I think it's like 40 pixels. So let's actually zero that out by saying padding 0. Okay, if we reload, you'll see that it gets rid of that. You can also change the bullet points if you want by using list style. So if we say list style square and reload, now they're still squares. You can also completely get rid of them by saying list style none. Okay, reload, and now it doesn't have any. Alright, now before we get to the styling the LI tags, let's talk a little bit about links, because links actually have different states. Now I could say categories A to just target the links in the categories, but I'm actually going to go up top here and apply global styles to the links, so just A. So this will apply to any link on the page. So let's start by getting rid of the underline. So we'll say text decoration none. Okay, that's going to get rid of that annoying underline. And you probably want to change the color because the default blue is really ugly, so let's change it to black. Okay, so now you can see the links are black. Now, as I said, they have different states. So they have a hover state, so we can say A : hover, And let's say we want to change the color to red when they're hovered. So reload. Now when I hover over each link, it turns red. There's also an active state. Oops. And active, let's make it green. Active is just when you click on it, it just flashes real quick. You see how it turns green for a second when I click on it? That's meaning it's active. Alright, we also have a visited state. So if we say a visited, and let's say color yellow. Okay, now if I reload, they're all going to turn yellow because we did visit all of these. But if we were to add another one, let's say category 5 and save, reload. Well, I guess that's, oh, you know what? Let's make it go somewhere else. We'll say test.html. Okay, so now it's black because it goes by the actual location. But if I click on that, obviously that goes nowhere because it's a blank page. But if we go back and reload, well, I guess it doesn't work because it's not an actual page. So I guess, I mean, if we created a test.html, that should turn yellow. I honestly can't remember the last time I used visited, but just so you guys know, you can do that. Alright, so let's go back down to our categories, and let's get rid of that style. Actually, I don't want the visited to be yellow. Let's make it black. Alright, so now let's say categories LIs, and for the LI, let's add a little bit of padding to the bottom. So we'll say 8 pixels, and let's actually add a border to the bottom. We'll say dotted 1 pixel, and let's say 333 for the color. We'll reload, and now it looks something like that. Alright, let's actually do not 8 pixels, we'll do 6. Alright, now for the bullet points, you can do this list style. You can do it on either the UL or the LI. And then we also have this list style image. Okay, and you can actually set this to an image like you would set a background image, which I'll get into later. So let's say URL, and we'll say /images/check.png. Alright, and what I'm going to do is grab an image. Let's say checkmark images, and let's grab this check mark right here, and I'm just going to save it as check.png, and we're going to save it in our desktop, CSS crash course, CSS cheat sheet, and then I'm going to create a folder called images. Okay, and then in there we'll save it, and then let's go to our site and reload, and notice that it uses the actual size of the image. So I'm going to make that smaller. Okay, and you can do that however you want. I'm just going to open it with Photoshop. Let's see, is this the right folder? Desktop. Alright, so I'm just going to open this real quick, and you, like I said, you can resize it however you want. I'm just giving you an example of what I do to resize images. So I'm just going to go to, let's see, image size, change it to 10 pixels, and then I'm just going to resave it as a PNG file, save. So now it should be 10 pixels. So let's reload, and now you can see we have little checks next to our categories. Alright, and you may want to push this over a little bit if you're going to use bullet points, because we set the padding to 0. But let's say we just want to say padding left 20 pixels, and that'll push it over. Alright guys, so we're starting to run out of time. I still want to get to the layout page, so this may be a little longer than an hour. But let's move on to forms, okay? Because forms are very ugly by default. And we want to stay within the container, which ends right here. I'm actually going to put a comment here. Oops. Just letting us know that this is where the container ends, because we want to stay within it. Alright, so let's go ahead and put in a form. And I'm actually going to just paste all the fields in. Let me just make this bigger. So basically what I did, just tab this back. basically what I did is I created a couple fields and I wrapped them in a div with the class of form group. Okay, if you've used Bootstrap before, this is actually the class they use. And then we have the label and we have the input. So we have a name, email, and then a text area, which is a message, and then a simple submit button. All right, so let's save that and see what it looks like by default. Okay, so it looks pretty damn ugly. Now, I don't want you guys to have to look at the very bottom of the screen, so let me just really quickly, I'm going to put a div in here and just give it an inline style of margin top 500 pixels, just to push everything down, or push everything up. Alright, so let's go ahead and start to make this form look a little better. So we're going to go to our style CSS. Actually, let's give the form a class. So we'll say class my form. Alright, and then in here we're going to target my form. And first of all, I'm just going to add some padding. We'll say 20 pixels. That'll be around the entire form. Okay, and then let's separate the form group a little bit, each field. So remember, we gave it a class of form group. So we're just going to add some padding bottom of 15 pixels. Okay, that'll separate it a little bit. Now for the label, labels are inline. That's why they're on the same level as the input. Okay, inputs and labels are inline. I want this to be on a separate line without having to put an actual line break in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the label. Actually, you know what? We should be putting my form before all of these, like that. Alright, we'll say my form label, and then I'm going to display that. Even though it's inline, we can set it to be a block. Okay, and remember, block level elements, they'll put it on a new line and they go across the entire line. So if we save, now you'll see that labels are on their own line. Now let's make these text inputs look a little better. So we'll say my form input, and let's add some padding to make them look a little thicker. So we'll say 8 pixels, and then let's also set the width to be 100% of its container. So reload. Now, a couple things here. Notice that since we said just input, that's going to pertain to any input, even the button, which is also an input. If we had, let's say, a radio button, it would pertain to that as well. And it didn't target this because this is actually a text area. It's not an input tag. Now, what we could do is we can target certain types of inputs. So these are both text, right? So what we can do is put a set of brackets here, and we can say type equals text. And then what that's going to do, when I reload, it should disregard the button because that's not the type of text. Okay, see what I'm saying? And then the text area, we also want to add those styles to. So I'm just going to put a comma here, and we're just going to say dot my form text area. Reload, and then it applies it to that as well. Now let's add a little bit of styling to the button here. So what I could do is I could say my form input, and then we could say, whoops, we could say type equals submit. Okay, we could do that, and let's give it a background color of dark gray. We'll make the color white. Let's say padding on the top and bottom we'll do 15. No, we'll do 10 pixels, and left and right 15. And then let's say border none. Okay, let's reload, and now we get this button. Now this is fine, but what I want to do is I want to have a class called button that we can apply to any button and get this style. So instead of doing this right here, what I'm going to do is just change this to dot button, and since this is just global, not part of just the form, I'm going to just put it up here instead. So let's go like under the container, and then what I would do is apply that class to this input. Okay, well, actually I already did do it. So that should still work. Alright, now if I wanted to put a button somewhere else, like let's say in box 2, or not even just a button, it could be a link. So we'll just put a link. We'll say read more. If we just leave it like that, of course it's going to just look like that. But if we put class button, now we get that. Okay. And actually, since it's a link, we want the color to be white. So let's go back to button. Let's see, color. You know what, it's getting, this is mixing it up, the visited color. So let's actually get rid of that right there. There we go. Alright, cool. So we can apply that class anywhere. And if we wanted to put a hover state for the button, we could do that as well. So if we say button hover, and let's say background red, color white, and now we have that color, that hover effect. Alright, hopefully that isn't too confusing. So that's our form, very simple. Now what I want to do is talk about alignment and floating. Okay, so let's go back to our HTML. We'll go under the form, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put in 3 blocks. Okay, so let's say div, and let's give this a class of block, and inside these blocks we'll have an h3. We'll just say heading, and then we'll have a paragraph with some dummy text. I'm just going to make it a little shorter. Let's go like right there. Oh. And we're going to have 3 of these, so let's copy this whole div with the class of block, paste it in 2 more times, and reload. So normal flow, we're just going to have them on top of each other, but let's say we wanted to float them to go to the side. Alright, we want them to go horizontally. So let's go to our CSS. Remember, they all have a class of block, so we're going to say we want these to float to the right. Actually, let's say float left, and we're going to set a width. Now, since there's 3 of them, I'm going to set the width to 33.3%. Alright, and then let's just add like, actually, let's just do that for now. Let's see what that does. Alright, so reload, and now we have our 3 blocks. Now, if I wanted to, let's say, put a border, we'll say 1 pixel solid C, and let's put in padding 10 pixels, and let's reload. Now that's going to mess everything up, because what it's doing is it's taking this width, which just barely fits everything in, and then it's adding 10 pixels padding, it's adding a pixel of border, which makes it too big to put all on the same line. So the easy fix for this is to add a property called box sizing. Oops, not box shadow, box sizing, and we set this to the value of border box. So if we save that and reload, now notice they're all back on the same line, because what this does is it makes it so that it takes in padding and border, and it takes this stuff in and applies it into the width itself, so that it's not adding it to it, making it too big or too wide. Alright, so just to let you know. Now, when you get into Flexbox, Flexbox takes care of this stuff really nicely, and you can do a lot more. But like I said, that's too advanced for this video, for this tutorial. You might want to check out the Flexbox in 20 minutes video that I did. Alright, so what about floating elements that aren't all the same width like this? Let's go ahead and do like a main area and a sidebar. So we'll go below those 3 blocks. Now, when you float stuff, you're going to want to clear it, because your next markup is going to be all messed up. It's going to be like up here. So what we do is we create a div. Let's give it a class of CLR. You might also see clearfix sometimes. I like to use CLR. And then I'm going to put this at the top, because this is kind of a global class. So we'll go like right here and say .clr. And we just want to add clear both. And that's going to clear any floats above it. Okay. And then what we'll do is create a div. This time I'm going to give it an ID. So I'll give it an ID of main block. Alright, and then let's also do a div with an ID of sidebar. Okay, so in the main block, let's just grab this H3 in this paragraph, and then sidebar, we'll just have the paragraph. So by default, obviously these are going to be on top of each other. But let's say we want the heading to be kind of the main area and take up like this much space, and then the sidebar over here. So what we would do is go to our CSS, and remember their IDs, so we want to use a number sign, and let's say main block. Okay, main block, and we're going to float that to the left, and then I'm going to set a width of 70%, okay, because I want this to be kind of responsive. Alright, and then let's copy that, and then for this we'll say sidebar. That's what I called it, right? Sidebar, and we want that to float to the right, and we want that to be 30%. Alright, so let's go ahead and save that and reload, and there we go. Now for the sidebar, I'm also going to add, actually let's add a background color of dark gray, color white, color white, and let's add padding 15 pixels and save. Okay, now again, it's going to go on down here, it doesn't look right, so what we need to do is just add in our our box sizing of border box. Okay, and we're going to also add some padding in the border box on our main block. Okay, so now we'll reload, and there we go. So now it's floated correctly. Alright, so we are getting there, guys. Now I want to talk a little bit about positioning. Alright, so the position property has a few different values. So static is actually the default. If we don't assign a position, it's static. This just renders the elements in order of the document flow. Relative means that the element is positioned relative to its normal position. So it falls naturally, but we can add properties like top, left, right, bottom, and so on. And we can push it to where we want. Now, absolute will allow us to target whatever position we want inside of a relative element, and I'll show you what I mean in a second. Fixed is a fixed position to the browser window, so no matter how much we scroll, where we are on the page, it'll always be in the same position. Initial sets the property to its default value, and then inherit will inherit whatever the property of its parent element. So let's take a look at some of these in action. Alright guys, so back to our HTML. Remember we did float the main block and sidebar, so I'm going to go under those two divs and just clear it out. So we'll say div, and we're going to give it a class of CLR. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a div, and let's give this a class of p-box for positioning box. Alright, and then I'm going to put an h1 in here. We'll just say hello, and then let's also put an h2, and we'll say goodbye. And I'm just using these so I can give you some examples on positioning. So let's go ahead and save that. Now if we reload, we're just going to see the two headings, but we're going to go to our CSS now. Just make that a little smaller, and let's see, we're going to target the p-box element that we just created, and I'm going to set a specific width and height to this. So let's say 800 pixels for the width, height we'll say 500 pixels, and then let's just add a border around it so we can definitely see it. So 1 pixel solid, 1 pixel solid black. Alright, so if we look at that, that's what it's going to look like. Now let's add a little margin to the top to push it down a little bit. Alright, so this is position static by default. Now I want these to be positioned absolute so I can move them around wherever I want within its element. Now to do that, actually let me show you what happens if we don't set it to relative first. So if we say dot p box, and let's target the h1, that should be a dot, All right, and then let's say top, and we'll set it to 40 pixels. So let's see what happens when I reload to this H1. Nothing. Let's see, that's because I didn't set it to absolute. I want position absolute. All right, and then reload, and now it disappears. Now it doesn't actually disappear. What happens is if we go up here, here it is. So what's going on is we're saying top 40 pixels, so it's coming down 40 pixels from the top. Now, since it doesn't have a parent element that is positioned relative, it's just going to use the entire HTML document, okay, as its container. Now, we want it to be pushed 40 pixels from the top of this element of pbox. So in order for that to happen, we need to actually set this to position relative. All right, so now if we save and reload, now it's pushed 40 pixels from the top. And just to show you, I'll change it to 100. All right, and then we can basically put this element wherever we want. If we want it to go, let's say, from the left 200 pixels, reload, and then you can see it's down 100, and to the left, or to the right from the left 200. Okay, let's say we wanted to move goodbye like somewhere down here. We'll say p-box, and we'll target the H2. Set it to position absolute, and then let's say we want it from the bottom 40 pixels, and then let's say from the right 100 pixels. Okay, reload, and there we go. So you can see we can put this stuff wherever we want, and this is really helpful when you're building games that have to do with CSS. Alright, you can imagine moving like a little image, a little checker or something around the board. Alright, now let's look at fixed positioning real quick. So what I'll do is I'm going to actually go outside of the container, and I'm going to create an A tag. Alright, let's actually give it a class of button. Okay, remember we have that button class. And I'm also going to give it a class of, let's say, fix me. Okay, so it has two classes now, fix me and button. Now if I reload, it's going to show down here. Whoops, we have no text inside the link. We'll just say hello. Alright, so we have this button, hello. Now, if we set it to fixed, what it'll do is it'll be kind of stuck on the page somewhere, and wherever we scroll, it'll still stay there. So let me show you. If we go down here and we say dot fix me, and then we're going to set position to fixed, and then let's set top to 400 pixels. Alright, so now if we save and reload, you'll see that that button is now going to stay there 400 pixels from the top of the browser, and it's not going to move, okay, no matter where we are on the web page. And that's really cool for like social media links, things like that, where you want the user to always see it. Sometimes you'll even see this with the nav bar, so when you scroll down, the nav bar still shows. Alright, so we're past an hour now, and we still have to do the layout, so I apologize that this is taking so long, but I do want to cover everything. So what I want to do now is show you how to use an image as an element background. So we're going to use this right here, this pbox. So let's see, I'm just going to grab an image real quick. Let's say light abstract image. Actually, that's not what I want. Let's grab this right here. Alright, so I'm going to grab this image, and I'm going to just save it as bg image.jpg, and we'll save it to our cheat sheet images folder. Alright, and then let's go back, we can close those. Let's go back to our CSS, and under pbox, let's say background-image. And then we're gonna say URL, and then in here we need a path to the image. So it's gonna be .. because right now we're in the CSS folder, but we want to go outside of it, so that brings us out. And then we want to go into the images folder, and then we want to call bg image.jpg. All right, so let's save that and reload. and now you'll see we have the image as the background. Now there's different background styles we can use. So for instance, the position. So let's go down here and say background position, and we're going to set that to, let's say, 100 pixels, 200 pixels, and reload. What that's going to do is it's going to push it down 100 pixels and push it over 100 pixels and down 200. Now notice that it's actually repeating. The image is repeating. Okay, this is the end, and then it repeats both ways. So what we're going to do is set background dash repeat to no repeat. Alright, and reload, and now you'll see that it does not repeat. Now for a background position, you can also use, I cannot type position today. You can also use center, let's say center, and reload, and that will center it on the horizontally and vertically. We could say center top, reload, and that'll center it top. So you can use pixels, or you can use center. You can also use percentages, I believe. Alright, but that's all we're going to do with the background images. Alright, so the last thing I want to do inside the cheat sheet is I want to show you a little bit about pseudo classes. So what I'm going to do is in the container under the P box, let's go ahead and put in a UL. We're going to have a bunch of LIs. I'm just going to say list item, and we'll copy that. We're just going to have a bunch of these. Okay, so we'll reload. So we have a bunch of list items, and we can use pseudo classes to target certain things. So let's say that, well, let's give that a class actually. So UL class, we'll just call it my list. Alright, so we'll say dot my list, and actually we're going to target an LI, and then I'm going to use a pseudo class by using a colon, and we're going to say first dash child. Okay, and then we're going to set the background. We'll say background, and we'll set that to red. Notice that we don't have to use background dash color. We can use background, and then we can use either a color or an image here. Okay, and that's going to get the first child. It's going to get the first LI. We also have last child. Okay, so last child, and we'll change that to, let's say, blue. I'm not going to go over all of the pseudo elements, but just some of the important ones. Now, let's say you wanted to target like the fifth one of this. So what you could do, and this is all CSS3. We could say my list li, and then we could use something called nth child, and then we're going to put in some parentheses here. And let's say we want the fifth, so we could put 5, and then we'll say color, or let's say background yellow. Alright, so we'll reload, and now the fifth one is yellow. So you can target whatever one you want using these pseudo elements. Now you can also use even and odd with nth child. So let's copy that, and let's say we want all of the even to be gray. And reload, and now all the even list items will have a gray background. So very, very helpful, especially if the stuff is dynamically generated and you can't really target a specific list item. Alright guys, so we've looked at quite a bit, pretty much all of the fundamentals of CSS as far as the properties and all that. I mean, there are more, but it's impossible to go over all of them in this amount of time. I'm way over what I wanted to do, but I do want to do what I promised and kind of create a website layout for you guys. So hopefully this isn't too long. If you've watched it up to this point, then I'm sure you won't mind watching another 10-15 minutes. So I'm going to do this kind of quick because we did go over most of the stuff that we're going to be doing here. So in my website, I'm going to create a new file called index.html. Why do I keep doing that? I do that because I usually use Atom, and when you do that, you create a new file. You can just type the name and save. You don't have to do Control S. Alright, and then let's create a folder called CSS, and we'll create another folder called images. Alright, now in CSS we'll create a file and let's save it as style.css. Okay, we're now in the My Website folder. Cheat sheet is done. Okay, so we have these two files. Let's go ahead and add some basic markup to our website. I'm just going to say My Website. Alright, and then we want to link the style sheet. So let's link to css/style.css. And then we're going to write our markup, and that's usually what I like to do, is do the markup first and then the styling. So we're going to be using HTML5 semantic elements. So let's start with a header, and our header is just going to basically have an H1, and we'll just call it My Website. That's kind of like our logo. And I'm going to give this header an ID of main header. Alright, now we're going to have a container class that's going to push everything to the middle and so on, but I don't want to wrap it around the whole site because I don't want everything to be pushed over. For instance, the header, I want the background color to go across the whole thing, but I want the content, the actual H1, to be, to have the container around it. So we're going to be using the container inside of this and inside a lot of our elements. Alright, so there's our header. Next thing we'll do is the nav bar. And again, we're going to have the container inside of it. So what I'm going to do is just copy this. We'll change this to nav. Change the ID to nav bar. Make sure you change that as well. And then we're going to have our UL. Let's do our LIs. Okay, our A tags. They're not going to actually go anywhere. But this is our fake navigation. So we'll say home, about, services, and contact. Alright, and then under that we're going to have like a showcase area. So for that I'm going to use a section tag, and I'm going to give this an ID of showcase. Notice these are things that you use IDs for, because I'm not going to have another main nav bar or another main header or a showcase. This is all unique stuff, so I'm giving it an ID. Okay, so that gives you an example of the difference. Alright, and then container, however, we're using in all different places, so that is a class. Okay, let's put an H1 in our showcase. Just put some dummy text. I want it really short though, so I'll just do that. Alright, so that's our showcase. Let's tab that over. And then under the showcase we're going to have like the main area, which is also going to be a section. So let's say section, section ID main. And we'll just put an H1 in here. We'll say welcome. And then we'll have a paragraph with some dummy text. Now the main area will be on the left, and then we'll have a sidebar, which is going to be an aside. Alright, and the aside, I'm going to give that an ID as well of sidebar. Alright, and then let's see, what do I want to put here? We'll just put some text. I'll just copy this. I'll make it a little shorter though. Alright. Now the main and the sidebar, I do want both of those pushed to the middle, so I'm going to wrap a container around both of those. And once this comes together, you'll see exactly why I'm doing this. Whoops. Alright. And then finally we just want a footer. So we're going to use an HTML5 footer tag, and let's give that an ID of main footer. Okay, we'll put a paragraph, and let's say copyright ampersand 2017 My Website. Alright, so that should be all the markup. So now let's go to our file path here. It's in crash course / actually we'll just open it from Explorer. Let's see, My Website, index.html. So that's what it looks like without CSS. Why isn't that? Oh my god, that should be copy. 2017. All right. So this is what it looks like without CSS. Now we're going to start to add our styles. Again, I'm going to be doing this kind of quick because a lot of this stuff we already went over. So let's say body. Let's say background or background color, light gray. A lot of the styles will be the same as well. So we'll say color will be 5, font family Arial, Helvetica, sans serif. Okay, we'll set the font size to 16. Let's set the line height. And these are just common settings that I use a lot, the line height and so on. And then I'm going to just margin out to 0. Alright, and then the container. So container will be 80%. We want the margin auto. And we're going to set overflow to hidden so that there's no scroll bars even if something goes outside of its container. Alright, now remember we have the header, which has an ID of main header. So for that I'm going to set the background. Actually, let's do background color. And I'm going to set that to the color coral. And then set the actual text color to white. Alright, so let's look at that. So that's what it looks like. Now we want to style the nav bar, and this is actually really easy. All we need to do is take the padding away from the UL, take the bullet points away. We need to float the links, or not float, but display them inline. Okay, so that you know, they float across. Well, I guess we will float them as well. I'm sorry, we're not going to make the links inline. We're going to make the list items inline. So let's grab the UL. So we'll say main. Nav bar. Well, let's do the nav bar itself first. Excuse me. Which is going to have a background color of dark gray. We'll say color white. And let's say, actually that's fine, we'll just leave that. And then the navbar UL, let's get rid of the padding. Let's get rid of the bullet points, so list style none. Alright, so if we go ahead and we look at it, that's what it'll look like. Now the LI tags, we want those to be inline instead of block. So let's say navbar LI, and we're going to set display inline. Alright, now if we look at that, you'll see now that they go to the side. And then the last part of the navbar to style is the links. So navbar A, let's set the color to white. Let's set the text decoration to none. Let's set the color to oh, we already did the color. Let's set the font size to 18 pixels, make them a little bigger, and then padding right, because we don't want them so close together, to 15 pixels. Reload, and there we go. There's our navbar. So next thing is the showcase. So showcase, and we're gonna set a background image for this. Oops, I'll just type it. Background image, URL. Okay, that's going to be, it's going to go /images/showcase.jpg. So let's get that image. That was the light abstract coral. Where is it? Let's narrow this down to large. This, is that it? I don't think that's it. Right here. I'm going to grab this image here. And you can use whatever image you want, but I'm going to save this, make sure it's in the my website images, and we're going to call this showcase. Alright, so if we go back to our site, Actually, we need to add some other stuff here. So we have the background image. Let's set the position. So background position, I'm going to set that to center right. And let's set the height. Now, I'm going to set it just as height for now, but then I'm going to show you something. All right, and then that's good. Let's save it. All right. So actually, let's add a couple other things here. We'll say margin bottom, because we want to push everything down. Let's say 30 pixels, everything under the showcase. And then let's also text the line to the center. Okay, now I want to grab onto the H1 that's in the showcase. So for the H1, I'm going to change the color to white. I'm going to change the font size to 50. I want to make it bigger. I'm going to change the line height. I'm going to change that to 1.6 em, and then just add some padding to the top, 30 pixels. So that'll move the H1 down. So let's go ahead and reload. All right. Now, as I go smaller here, notice that the text goes outside of the height here. So this is a case where you want to use min height, okay? Because you want the height to gradually grow if the text grows. So in the showcase, instead of just height, we're going to say min dash height. So if we're at this level, there we go, 300. But if we make it smaller, you'll see that the height will grow with the text, which is what we want. That makes it responsive. In fact, this website will be responsive. Alright, so that's the showcase. Now for the main and the sidebar. So we have the main part here, right? And then this is the sidebar. We want to float those. So let's say main, float to the left, set the width to 70%, padding set to 0, 30 pixels, and then let's set the box sizing to border box, so it includes that padding and stuff. Alright, and then for the sidebar, it's going to be kind of similar, so I'm going to just copy that. I'll say sidebar. It's going to float to the right. We're going to give it a width of 30. Let's give it a background of dark gray and a color of white, and that should be good. Actually, let's do padding 10 pixels all the way around. Reload. There we go. And then for the footer, remember it has an ID of main footer. I'm going to set background of dark gray, color of white, text align to the center, and what else? Padding. Let's do 20 pixels of padding, and then let's move it down a little, so margin top, we'll say 40 pixels. Save that, reload, and there's our footer. Now the last step is to make it completely responsive. Right now, if we go down small like this, I don't want these to be floated. So what we need to do is add a media query. We can add a media query by saying @media, and then the condition is if it's a max width of 600 pixels. So any styles we put in here are only going to be in effect if it's under 600 pixels, like this over here. And what we want to do is we want to remove the floats from the main and the sidebar. We also want to change the width to 100%, okay, for both of those. So let's say main width 100%, and then we want to say float none. Okay, same thing with the sidebar. So basically they just go on top of each other. Alright, so let's save, reload, and there we go. So we now have a responsive website using CSS. Alright, so that was a long video, guys. Hopefully you learned a lot. I feel like it was pretty good. It was conveyed pretty well. You know, let me know if you think different, or let me know if you liked it. Please subscribe if you liked it. And that's it. Thanks for watching, guys. I do have a Patreon account that's linked in the description. if you guys want to support me even further, even for $1 per month, I do have a couple perks, and I'm in the process of figuring out some more to give to my patrons. So check that out. It's in the description. And thanks for watching.